So, Brittany, can you tell me a little bit more about what it's like as a parent with a sensory disability? What are the processes or things to be mindful of that assisted you in preparing you and your child for the new school year?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just want to say first off, I'm really glad to be asked to do this. It's very exciting, and I always love just like the little bit of advocacy that I can always get in to help other families. Um, so to jump right in and answer the question about like the processes of either going to school for the first time when you graduate from AZIP to pre-K, or returning to school every year. Um, it's my daughter, I guess a little background is my daughter was unilaterally aided with a cochlear implant. So I understand that if you don't have your child aided with a CI or a hearing aid, that this might look a little bit different. But I know that one thing that I would always forget about was appointments, the amount of appointments that we would have to go back to school just to do checkups on her CI, her hearing aids, make sure that they're programmed correctly, make sure that they're going to pair with her FM system that was going to work in the classroom for her, meeting with the teacher, making sure they understand an FM system, making sure they understand all of this the amount of technology that just goes into allowing my daughter to have access to what she can hear. Um, and then it's always like, stuff like making sure on the other end of the spectrum, making sure that she does have an ASL friendly environment, um, and making sure that she just has access in her classroom for opportunities for ASL, because I am a hearing parent, but I know from having my daughter that using technology to hear can be very exhausting, and she won't want to wear her CI someday or her hearing aid someday, but she still needs that access in the classroom. Um, and then how all of that plays into the IEPs or your METs if you're new transitioning from AZIP to school. There's also a lot of uh, advocacy that goes on. And it's always nice to have like you guys over at the Arizona Commission of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, your website, to have access to all of the services you guys offer, including advocacy when it comes to this. I don't know what it's like to be deaf or hard of hearing. So to have people that can walk along that process, especially when it came to writing an IEP, possibly with other hearing only people, there's you guys to help advocate for people like my daughter, help people like me understand, there's a lot that goes into getting a child with hearing loss or deafness back into a classroom or into a classroom for the first time. And it's overwhelming for the kid. I'm glad you guys are there to definitely help with that. There's also a lot of other advocacy groups that can help out that aren't maybe so much deaf focused, but they're there to help with the IEP process and make sure that you're heard as a parent when you're trying to do the best you can for your child. So it's a lot. It's not like sending my typical children to school. Here's your backpack and go. Here's your backpack full of like your backup batteries and your backup this and your backup technology and all of that stuff. So that's definitely you know, part of it, and it's overwhelming for the first one or two times, but when you get going with it, it's definitely becomes much easier.
Thank you, Brittany. That sounds great, and definitely can see how that might be overwhelming for a lot of parents who are new to this process. Keeping that in mind, I am curious if you're focused on a family with a child with a sensory disability, with everything that you've talked about, what is the one thing you wish you knew before that you didn't know at that time that you would like to share with new parents who might be going through that same process?
What I wish I knew before was a lot of stuff like the advocacy programs like you guys. ASDB has a deaf mentor program, and just understanding not that I can fully understand what it's like to be deaf. It is not my lived experience, but just having those people alongside to give me that perspective so I can then drive what is best for my child. So understanding that how language access plays into that. Understanding, you know, how overwhelming sensory environments can be when you have an impairment or you have technology. Stuff like that was like something that I along the way picked up and along the way was exposed to that I really wish I had back then. So I would definitely encourage parents that are new to all of this to definitely look into, you know, a lot of the programs that are out there for us, especially if we're a hearing parent, to understand about our sensory impaired child. Not to mention like how just that small understanding that I was given about deafness can play into writing stuff like IEPs or making the MET or having that team come together at the MET meeting that will drive your IEP or make sure your child is placed in the least restrictive environment for them, because sometimes the least restrictive environment is something like Phoenix Day School of the Deaf, where it's an all deaf kind of environment for your child, instead of maybe mainstreaming them with their district and having someone with them or having accommodations in a typical classroom. So it's, you know, and then of course, like I wish I had known about language access earlier so I could have then given my own self a better foundation for ASL. There's a lot of resources out there for ASL. We took, when my daughter was little, Phoenix Day School of the Deaf did an ASL class for parents. And so we went every, I think it was like on Thursday nights, and learned ASL. I just wish I knew how much more important that was than it seemed at the time. Like it seemed like, oh yes, we're just learning ASL, but I don't want to like get too ahead of myself, but it definitely played much more into understanding my daughter, and B, shaping her future for her.
That's a great response with a lot of detail and a lot of specifics. I think that is information that could really help parent. You mentioned something interesting though, talking about language acquisition and American Sign Language and going through the process of the educational system. I am curious, what does language acquisition mean to you as a parent, and how has that shaped your ideas as we talk about getting kids into school?
Yes, language acquisition, being a parent that's done this for a little while, is one of my most favorite terms that I know now and understand now, but I did not understand or know back when she had turned 3 and we're in the process of moving from AZIP to school. But I feel like language acquisition even superseded that. I wish I would have known about it, even just having a deaf child. A little tiny background on that is my daughter was actually born deaf. So we had anticipated this. We had known this. And we knew this was going to be her life. So yes, when you have a deaf child, your idea is, oh, I have to sign with them. But then there's other ideas that come out like, oh, what about how do they navigate through life, or how do they do this, or how do they do that? And it's very hard to comprehend a lot of the time as a hearing parent. And specifically having a deaf-blind child, the only thing I was familiar with was Helen Keller. So just trying to like understand all of this. And luckily we had an amazing hearing therapist through early intervention, AZIP, that really was like, hey, like I know you think like she has a visual impairment, and yes, she has a hearing impairment at the same time, but you know, you can still sign. And that was kind of like, okay, yeah, we can. And my daughter loves sign. Like if she had ability to move her body because she's multiply disabled. I'm 100% she would pick ASL as her language. But I just kind of like went through the motions of signing, and I went through the motions of when she went through ASDB and made goals, and then when we went through met in IEP meetings and made goals, like never really understood why we did some of the things we did. I just kind of sometimes went along with it, like, yeah, okay, yep, this seems important, so we'll do this. Or like, I feel like it's very important we have an intervener in her classroom for her. But I wasn't really sure why, other than I knew the role of an intervener meant that she would provide an ASL environment for my daughter to understand what is going on in the classroom, which seemed very important to me. I can hear the things going on, but the ASL, the intervener would give her the information. What I didn't know until my tenure on the board of directors and learning about the school side of things that I didn't know just as a parent was the things we did, and the reason I felt intervener was important and the reason we felt sign was important was because all of that's under the umbrella of language acquisition, and no one had actually ever kind of like broke down language acquisition for me, and said, this is why we do it, we do, and this is how we do it, and this is how we work to achieve that goal. It was more like just kind of the pieces. And yeah, that's great, especially when it's like people that are teachers telling you these things. But I feel like if I had been told very early on, like even maybe when she was in a baby, language acquisition is important, and the best way to get a language acquisition for someone who is deaf or has a hearing impairment and or other sensory impairments or maybe other physical impairments, the best way to get them what they need is something like ASL. And we definitely saw that with my daughter. I feel like if I had been told what language acquisition actually was, I could have done a lot more things differently. But it definitely, once all those pieces kind of fit together, and it was like, wow, that's the light bulb. Like, yes, this all makes sense. I understand how important this is. I'm giving my daughter an ASL rich environment at home, at school, take her out grocery shopping. We still sign about everything that goes on, just to give her that. So she has all of this information that she can process for herself and work out for herself. Like, that would have been really, really helpful for me as maybe a new parent, and to understand. And then that just kind of like would have made, I feel like a lot of discussions around her IEPs a lot more concise and to the point, instead of like, well, why is this? Or why is that? Or maybe I don't understand. And I feel like I would have walked away maybe as a more confident parent from some of the IEP meetings, instead of like, okay, I guess, if that makes sense. So language acquisition, it's something I'm really passionate about. It's something that's really important to me, especially when we talk about using ASL as language acquisition. Even though, like I said, my daughter was aided and implanted, I mean, she would whip off her CIs if she was done. And that was something that we were totally okay with. We'd give her a break and we would sign. Even if she wore them, we would sign. In the classroom, she had an intervener that would sign. Just even if she's not paying attention, just seeing the sign, talking to her, that's what gave her access to everything. And that gave her the ability to choose also. So learning that all these puzzle pieces work together for language acquisition was really a kind of beautiful moment, and was much more able to drive a lot more things for her once I understood that concept versus just kind of piecing it together.
Thank you, Brittany. That's a very thorough answer. Obviously, you are very much a wealth of information and knowledge and wisdom that I think will be very beneficial and helpful for other parents to share. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share that information. You made a great analogy using the concept of a puzzle of fitting all these different pieces together. And one of the things that ACDHH helps you do is to help parents identify what those pieces are and then help them be able to better put those pieces together so that they can have a better understanding of language acquisition and all the other topics that you've touched on as well. Thank you again for sharing this information and taking your time with us. We really appreciate you being with us today, and we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this opportunity.